So I pretty much had it up to my eyeballs with the amount of people that are weaponizing Steve's video about AIOs, showing people links to that video saying, you're doing your AIO wrong, watch Steve's video. You know what you're doing wrong? Not comprehending the content that Steve spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to educate you with, that you were too ignorant to watch the entire video and don't even understand what the hell it is you're trying to share the information about. So today we're gonna do a too long didn't watch version with Jay's touch on Idiot's Guide to AIOs. So we've all seen it a million times. You see someone that's like, I just built my first computer and I'm so excited, and they show a picture of their system that has the cooler like that. And the first thing you see is everyone going, hey, I want to sound smart, so I'm gonna share this link to people saying, you're doing it wrong, watch Steve's video. What we're referring to here is the orientation of the radiator. Like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. These are all the different options that you have. Now, let's talk about a few different things here because there's a lot of pieces to this. And the unfortunate thing about Steve's video is that it's just too long. And the length of it has made too many people skip to the, I don't want to say conclusion, because they'll just hear some piece of information and they'll take that and run with it without understanding what it is Steve is trying to educate them with. What Steve's video was aimed to show is that having the tubes at the top could allow air to reach the pump. Now, almost every AIO on the market, with a few exceptions, have the pump and the cold plate as a single unit. Every single Asetek rebranded / licensed AIO on the market has a pump / cold plate combo. The pump is physically inside here. Now, there are some variations to that in the market. People getting around the Asetek patent by putting an inline pump in the tube or putting it in the radiator directly, kind of like NZXT does, where you'll see a square in the center of the rad, and that's the pump in the radiator. So these are not going to apply, what we're going to talk about today is not going to apply to those quite like they do with the pump and the cold plate in a single unit. Now, let's first of all talk about the idea of air. Every single AIO has some amount of air in it. It is absolutely impossible to remove every single ounce of air, whatever the air measurement is, from an AIO. Most of the time these are vacuum filled. A lot of the time they're actually filled from the cold plate, and then they're pushed and pulled out like through a little vacuum tube type of deal. Then the cold plate is put on. In fact, Steve actually has a video about how AIOs are assembled. It's fun to watch. Since I'm referencing Steve's video here and not throwing him under the bus. He did a fantastic job of explaining the physics behind this. The problem is his audience, many of them did a terrible job at actually comprehending what they were looking at here. Now, some air is always going to get trapped in there. It's impossible unless you do a full-on, with a special port vacuum pull, would you get almost all the air out. Now, what he's referring to here later on happening in the air pocket in there that can grow is permeation. And that is where air collects inside the system and will start to evaporate fluid through the tubing. Now, that's going to depend on the material used in the tubing. And not all AIOs use the same. There's different grades of rubber. There's different types of vinyl. This one here is actually a rubber that has a sleeve over it. There's also FEP tubing, which is that really ribbed plastic tubing that's really nasty. That one's actually known to permeate quite badly. But the materials are going to depend on the amount of permeation there is, or evaporation of the fluid through the materials. Now, I want to point out that this one I'm going to be using here, right here, for example, this is a Celsius from Fractal Design. This one here is almost 3 years old. So we've got about 3 years worth of evaporation that's happening here. So when we do some examples right now, keep in mind that this would have had about 3 years worth of evaporation taking place. Some AIOs also will have a little port, like a little threaded screw hole, similar to what you see right here with this AlphaCool. Now, this is technically not an AIO. This is a custom rad that was part of an AIO kit that Phil had actually purchased for when he had his external GPU and he was using this to cool it. You can hear the air in this thing. Yeah, that one's really obvious, listen. Yeah, it's all sloshing around, but you could top it off. That's the nice thing about this. So if you have something here that can be topped off, some of the physics we're going to talk about right now actually don't apply to you as much as long as you keep it as filled as possible and you have that fill port at the highest point of the loop. Let's get back to the orientation. When the tubes are at the top, this immediately triggers everyone to start posting Steve's video saying, you're doing it wrong, watch Steve's video. what they're saying is happening here is the tubes on the top allow air to move out of the radiator and potentially get trapped in the pump. Now, where the air gets trapped depends entirely on what the highest point of the loop is. I have almost never seen a case that will allow a 360 millimeter front radiator to be mounted lower than the pump. Now let's look at what I'm doing right here with the tubes. I've seen over and over and over again people posting this stupid misinformation of you're causing air to get to your pump when the pump is like this. The pump is even a few millimeters lower than the outlets of the radiator. The air will get trapped up here. Now you might deal with some noise. You might hear some bubbles kind of moving around up in here because what will happen is the air won't work its way down because the air and the actual rising of the bubble is stronger than these pumps. So you'll hear it sort of get stuck up in here, which could sound like a small aquarium. Usually you won't hear it. This particular one, you can still hear there's a little bit of sloshing in there. There's definitely air sitting up in here. Now watch what happens if I flip it over. You still hear it sloshing at the top. It's funny how air rises, huh? Anyway, it's not like the bubble stayed at the bottom. So as long as your radiator is even slightly above your pump, you're not gonna have the drastic effect of air being sucked into your pump, reducing its lifespan. Now, air getting trapped in the pump, it's not great for temperatures. However, it's terrible for the lifespan. Fluid pumps do not move air. And these pumps are actually being lubricated and suspended by the fluid moving around them. So you can have premature wear, you can have bearing wear, you can have straight up pump failure. So, orientation number one. This is how you see like 90% of people doing it. As long as the pump is lower than the inlets by even a few, if we're talking perfectly horizontal right here. Now, I'm not talking about the tubing on the inlet. I'm talking about the highest point of the pump, which is gonna be up in here. So as long as the top of that circle is level with the inlets or the outlet and inlet of the radiator and below, you're fine. You're not gonna start sucking all kinds of air into the pump. It's going to stay in the radiator right here. Ideally, and what Steve was trying to promote, is if you can fit it like this, if you have enough tubing length to be able to put your radiator upside down with the end tank at the top, the air will get trapped here. It will never have a chance of sucking air into the radiator or the pump, which means you have a very long lifespan of the pump, with a very low likelihood of killing it due to permeation and air being trapped in it. Even if you had like air starting to collect and permeation and this whole top is air, as long as you can still suck water into the pump, it will still flow. Eventually you'll lose efficiency and efficacy because of the fact that the radiator is no longer full of fluid. That usually takes years and years to happen. So I've now turned the pump on and I've clipped my mic to the pump so that you guys can hear it. Listen. You hear the motor hum? So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna move the radiator around a couple of different ways so that you guys can actually hear the bubbles and percolation depending on the orientation. So this is the best orientation you could do right here. No change in sound, right? Even though I just rotated the radiator, all the air is at the top of the rad. By turning it, the air is still at the top of the rad, it just moved horizontal. Because as I'm moving the radiator, the bubble's moving in there like a bubble level you would see in a level. Now let's go ahead and flip it upside down. The way that everyone says is wrong with the tubes at the top. Let's see if we can hear any sound of air make its way into the pump. Nothing changed. Let's now force air into the pump so you guys can hear what it sounds like. There we go. So air just made its way to the pump. Now let me show you what's gonna happen next. So you hear all that air in the pump? This is bad, right? So what's happened now is the air is sitting right up here and it's moving around with the pump. The pump is having to actually work harder right now. And this is what leads to the death of pumps. But now if I go back the right direction, check this out. The air's trapped. So this is now when you would have to turn the system off and you would have to work the air out and start like moving your system around, try and get the air to move. The problem with 360 radiators, and the reason why you're seeing everyone mount them like this, is because the tubing length is not long enough to allow you to mount it upside down with how far away the front of the case usually is, plus there being a graphics card directly underneath your CPU. So before you go sending links to people with 360 radiators saying, you're doing it wrong, it's upside down, or it's right side up, you should be upside down, look at the picture. I can almost guarantee you the pump is lower than the inlet and outlet of the radiator. Something else to keep in mind. The air is never going to get trapped on the outlet side of the radiator. It is always, I repeat, always going to get trapped on the inlet side of the radiator, because any air that made it to the pump is still going to be pushed out. Then it will get trapped on the inlet side of the radiator, which is where you're going to hear it percolate and make all kinds of bubble sounds. The outlet is always going to be fluid. This is the other thing I don't understand why people don't seem to grasp the concept of, is air is going to move to the highest loop, the whole point in the loop. It's not going to go down the rad. It's not going to stay in the pump. If it still has water flow, it's going to get trapped on the inlet, which means it won't get trapped in the pump. I know Steve did a plexi cutout on the top of the rad when he did this. Unfortunately, I guarantee he never was able to get it as full as some of these loops can be when they ship from the factory, which is why the permeation argument came up, saying this is sort of accelerating and indicating what could happen with permeation over time. But we need to talk about the way they're going to perform, the way they also come out of the box. But the air will always get trapped on the inlet side of the pump or the radiator, not the outlet. With that out of the way, let's talk about 240s, because this is where you have a lot more flexibility and room for error. With the 240, it is perfectly possible to have your pump above the rad, because you have a whole 120 amount of space that you can move it up or down if your case supports a 360 in the front. This would be bad. If you have a 240 rad, there's no, an AIO, there's no reservoir or anything. So the radiator or the pump become the reservoir, and the air has to go somewhere. So ideally, if you can get your 240 in there and fit it like this, this is ideal in that the air will always be trapped in the top of the radiator. And this is what Steve was trying to explain. Once it makes it through the loop and gets up here, the pump does not have enough pressure to push it back down the rad. The actual rising effect of air inside of fluids is much stronger than this pump, and it can't push the bubble back down. It will get trapped in the top. If you decide you're going to do a top-mounted tubing in the front of your case with a 240, mount it as high as it can go, so it looks something more like this. The thing is, we've seen marketing material, and this is something else that Steve was really trying to point out, where NZXT themselves will show some of the small form factor cases with a pump on top and the rad on the bottom, like that. This is like the worst possible scenario in my mind. The reason for that is the only place the air can get trapped is in the pump. Because if it's horizontal like this, you can see the air can make it out of the tubes no problem, depending on which is inlet and outlet. I'm not sure which way this pump flows. This is a death sentence for your AIO over time. It will run fine initially if it's full. In fact, this is a perfectly full system. That rattle you're hearing is like something in the radiator, like a screw hole or something. There is no fluid making sound in this. So this would work like this until permeation happens over time and air starts to make its way into the system. Depending on the type of rubber they're using, how long that takes is dependent on the materials. Air will then make its way into the system, because as the fluid is evaporating, it gets replaced with air, otherwise the tube would just crush. It's the way permeation works. It's an exchange happening. The air will get trapped in the top of the pump. It will kill it over time. It was actually an NZXT AIO that died for Phil because he had to have it basically in this orientation, right? Phil was like this, sort of. It's like this.
Yeah, basically, exactly.
which it was only a 120, a lot less fluid, only a few fluid ounces of fluid, which evaporated very, very quickly. Ideally, if you can, mount the radiator on the top. This is the most efficient way to have an AIO mounted, because of the fact that the pump is on the bottom and the air will actually get distributed along the top of the rows like this. So you actually would have a very thin layer of air across every single row in the rad, and you would still have very good flow and very, very good efficiency and transfer of heat happening through your radiator. But the biggest mistake people are making is when they're automatically telling people mounting it like this is wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's sketch. That's okay, as long as it's below the level of the tubing. And Steve explained that. And he basically said, if you can't do it any other way than this, then fine. you're stuck, but it will work. The worst thing you'll probably experience is bubbling or percolation noise happening in the radiator because the air is getting trapped right there. As it's returning to the radiator, it's kind of going blah, 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 blah. It's like kind of spinning. The fluid's going back down, it's coming back out here, and you're getting full fluid return to the pump. That is fine, as long as there's no air in the pump and they get a full fluid return, then you're gonna be okay. I hope this helps shed some light on things, because nothing irks me more than seeing very basic science like this be misunderstood, and then videos trying to explain it, being weaponized, and being shared with people to try and make them feel like they're stupid for doing it wrong, when the irony is the person sharing the video didn't even understand the basic concepts of what it is that they were watching, because they skipped through the video and or repeated something someone else said incorrectly about Steve's video, trying to make themselves sound smart. So, hopefully that's helped shed some light on things. I know this video sounds extremely salty. The salt is warranted. We have had months now of this information being inappropriately passed around and misidentified and misexplained on the science that's actually happening behind AIOs. To recap, bad, bad, better, doable, best. Any questions?